Hi everyone, I'm Tanya Kupchandani Vatsa. I'm the founder and CEO of Elixir Wellness, and I'm here today with Dr. Marcus Ranney for the 9th episode of Spillingfacts. We're here today to talk to you all about longevity and biohacking. I'd love to introduce Dr. Marcus, who is an absolute expert in both fields, longevity, biohacking, and has recently launched a fabulous program of his own in this area as well. I would love for him to tell you all about it. So let me start by asking Dr. Marcus to tell us all about his journey.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to have seen the journey that both you and I have been on for well over a decade and how things have changed over that period of time. Longevity is a big word. It's a pretty loaded word, I feel, as well. The way people talk about it today, it's being used in many different conversations in different ways. For me, I sort of visualize it as a spectrum. You have individuals like Brian Johnson and Dave Asprey and folks on the one extreme who are trying to live forever, or the don't die movement. And who knows how successful they will be. I prefer to actually be on the other camp, which exists around how can we as physicians create an environment where people can be healthier for longer. I have no ambition to be immortal. I personally would be very scared by that prospect, actually. But I certainly want to ensure that however many years I have in life, that they are filled with health and I can do the things that I enjoy, whether it's climbing mountains or running marathons or playing with my kids or hopefully one day my grandkids. I just want to be in a good state of health to do so. And so that's sort of my definition of longevity and how I sort of try and clinically practice it.
I think we're aligned in that as well.
Yeah.
So just some background, we've actually worked together over a decade ago.
Yeah, well over a decade.
And both in very different spaces at that point. So I've seen, like you said, your evolution as well, in addition to mine. And I think we're aligned on this. So for me, longevity is not about being immortal and living forever, but it's about the quality that you have in the years that you live.
Yeah.
And I feel what's happened is as we're living longer, the disease burden is also increasing.
Yeah.
But I feel it should be the other way. We should be getting better quality of life in the years that we have. So with that in mind, I'd love to ask you, how did you get into longevity and biohacking?
So I've always been a biology geek, right? I actually discovered, whilst I spend so much time in the great outdoors, and we'll talk about some of those things, I actually discovered it through the lens of the biology textbook.
Okay.
So prior to medicine, my first degree was in physiology. I was serving in the Royal Air Force as a volunteer reserve at the same time. So I did that for 4 years. And that sort of exposed me to aviation medicine and expedition medicine. Through med school in university, I had the opportunities to be part of teams to Everest, to the Arctic Circle. I then worked at Kennedy Space Center in the US on the spaceflight program for a while as well. So my model of human biology has early on been one which was focused on extreme environments, incredible optimization, and high levels of performance.
Okay.
And then fast forwarded a few years, I'm a young house officer on the wards working in a district general hospital outside of London in the NHS. My first job was intensive care.
Okay.
My second job was urology. And my third job was geriatric medicine. So I've gone from high performance to frailty, from extreme to sort of sickness.
Yeah.
And that mental makeup just didn't fit well in my brain somewhere. So I've always been on this quest to try and sort of disrupt it and been incredibly frustrated. But to answer your question specifically about, how I started it, it actually began in the pandemic because when I contracted the virus for the first time, I, like many early on patients, went through a difficult journey, which involved a lot of steroids and antimicrobials. And in those days, we just threw everything at it, right?
Yeah.
We didn't know how to treat this. And I got very sick through the process. So I had to rediscover for myself the power of lifestyle medicine, or what now we call functional medicine, and sort of heal myself from the inside out. And through that personal journey, it sort of got me excited again to try and help other people on this journey as well. And that's sort of how the business and the clinic started.
That's amazing. Actually, I didn't realize that this happened during the pandemic and during COVID.
Yeah.
So you yourself, like you said, have been through a lot of expeditions. Your personal fitness and your adventures are something that I know are inspiring to many. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So, life for me is lived in the outdoors. Everything else is just sort of filling in between. I'm really happy that the kids are also taking to it. So something that my wife Ryan and I were trying to inculcate in them as well. We try and do one big expedition a year.
Okay.
And it started again as a couple through the pandemic. So we did a trip to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. We then did a trip into the Arctic Circle where we sort of ski walked for 1 degree.
Okay.
And most recently, we've actually just come off India's highest trekkable mountain, which is at almost 21,000 feet. So it was an incredible summit, the highest I've ever been to, thoroughly exhausted, but exhilarating at the same time. And I do these because it obviously allows me to push my body, and I get to learn a lot through that process. But there's a lot of interesting science in this, which can be translated and applied to our day-to-day lives. Just today, I was talking to someone about the applications of hypoxia. I know you've got a hyperbaric oxygen chamber here, which I'm sure we can delve into that science, but the modulation of oxygen is a massive trigger in the body and can do things, whether we want to enhance our training and high performance, like we do with a lot of our athletes and IPL cricketers and Olympians, or whether we're looking at it through the longevity lens. So there's lots that can be done. So that's just one little example of how the great outdoors have got impact for all of us. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. So I actually do want to get back to hypoxia, and I was reading something about it this morning as well, in fact, and hyperbaric. But before that, I want to go back a few years and ask you about your book, At the Human Edge. Tell us about that and what exactly that entails.
So this started before Ida and I got pregnant for the first time. She said to me, you've got some interesting stories. Why don't you sort of document them down? And so I just started writing about my field expeditions and my interest in how the science applies to it. And as that sort of work grew, there reached a point where I thought, okay, this would be an interesting, not asset, but just an interesting thing to leave for my kids in the hope that one day they might be inspired by science in the same way that I have been. And so the premise of the book, it's called Human Edge, At the Human Edge, which is about living life at the extreme. And each chapter specifically looks at a different extreme environment, whether it's running the full marathon, summiting Everest, surviving in the Sahara Desert, going to space. There are many different themes that I talk about. But whilst I take the journey or take the reader on a journey to that environment, it's as much a journey intrinsically. What's the physiological adaptations that are happening inside of your body that allows you to achieve those things? Because honestly, most of us today live a very comfortable life.
Absolutely.
We are protected by the elements. We are primarily a sedentary society, exposed to excessive amount of calories. And we think we're creature comforts and therefore it's a good thing. But actually, they're the worst things we can do for our body. Our bodies haven't evolved to exist in this sort of environment. So there's a lot, again, that can be learned from them. And that's also where biohacking comes in, which is how do you expose, again, like you have in your clinic, red light therapy, high temperature stress, cryotherapy, all of these things. How do you expose the body to these hormetic stressors where the body initially has a high degree of discomfort, but actually builds and grows and becomes a better, stronger version? So that was the premise of the book and sort of how we then practice from there.
Amazing. So actually, Dr. Marcus also works with a lot of elite level athletes. I know you work with the Rajasthan Royal teams as well. And I'd love to know what a typical consult with an athlete or even a team player looks like for you. How is it driven by longevity and what does that actually look like?
Yeah, I think the first thing for viewers to maybe understand is that there is an intrinsic dichotomy and tension between longevity and high performance. Both of those are in some degrees mutually exclusive of one another. For example, the training loads required to be an ultra marathon runner. I'm preparing for my first ultra, so I'm experiencing this myself. The training loads for that are completely juxtaposed to living healthy and long. right? The amount of the intensity, the number of hours, the sacrifices, and the effects, to the degree that if one were to take a blood test measuring cardiac enzymes after a marathon and compare them to the cardiac enzymes for someone in a ACS or acute myocardial infarct, it would be very hard to tell the difference between the two.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Okay.
So that's sort of the effort. So the first thing, whenever I'm having a conversation with an athlete, is to understand for them what are their goals, and how do we do this in a way which meets their acute needs versus creating a platform from a long-term perspective.
Okay.
Because whilst athletes are very successful, hopefully in a 3 to 4, 5-year horizon, we still need to ensure that their base allows them to live a long, healthy life, and we're not doing something counterintuitive or harmful for them through that perspective. So that's actually a really important conversation to have with athletes. It then really depends on the discipline. For example, I was working with one of the Olympians who, in the Parisian Olympics, was just recovering from a virus, right? And of course, he's spoken a lot about this already online. But that was a very different space to be in, because coming off the back of chikungunya and then healing the body from an inflammation, from a pain management perspective, very different to another Olympian who's not coming out of that post-viral illness stage, right? So it's very dependent. Again, different sports, badminton being different to cricket, being different to, I have runners, I have a shot putter in the Paralympics, etc. So there are lots of different sports and disciplines, but that's sort of the core. Is this, I think, very important for people to realize the differential between high performance and longevity. Yeah.
Actually, I hadn't thought about it like that. In fact, just yesterday, I was talking to someone about how when you're running versus when you're zone 2 training, how the impact on the body and the muscle is so different.
Yeah.
So I guess this is a similar sort of way when you're putting your body through extreme pressure, of course, in a much more intense circumstance. When you're putting your body through such extreme pressure, how does that actually impact the body and the longevity?
Yeah. So athletes will spend 80% of their time in zone 2 as well. It's not like that changes that much. It's just that a runner in zone 2 will be running at very different speeds and intensities than someone who's just beginning their running journey.
Absolutely.
So that's very different. But that's where recovery comes in, right? And that's where, again, there's a big emphasis, especially with professional athletes, for how much investment is made. And by investment, I mean energy, time, and resources in the recovery pre-game and post-game to prepare them then for the next one. Yeah.
So what do your longevity or even interventions for an athlete look like post a longevity cancer?
So there's a lot of energy spent around the supplementation, right? We are all deficient in a huge variety of different micronutrients, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, etc. That's where the IV infusions have a role to play as well, specifically for athletes. And I would include weekend warriors. I take an IV infusion, as you know, from your clinic every sort of 6 weeks or so, because of the supra-physiological dosages that it allows. Very difficult to get that from oral supplementation, right? It's also a very controlled environment. It's very convenient because you can then dose someone over a 45-minute window, as opposed to then having to wait for an effect to fortify. So the supplementation is a very important aspect. Sleep is very, very critical. And it goes down to the level of the temperature of the bedroom, the quality of the mattress and the bed sheet, the sound, the light. The preceding 2 to 3 hours is very, very important and very difficult. Like you take the example of IPL cricketers, most night matches finish around midnight. By the time the players get home to their hotel, it's usually about 2 a.m. If they've won, they're on this incredible adrenaline high. If they've lost, then obviously there's the converse of that. And then you've got to think about, they haven't really eaten since 2 p.m. that afternoon. The hotel staff might be asleep, so they're not going to get a proper meal. They may end up ordering something online. And then all the good work that you're trying to do is then completely undone. So you have to think very, very meticulously around what food, what timing, how to make it available to them. What's the bedroom environment like? And many years gone by, travel day used to be seen as a rest day. That's no longer the case. Now, thankfully, most of the teams today plan matches and charter flights specifically so that the athletes and the players have an opportunity to sleep well so that their body receives the rest. Of course, wearable devices, I mean, you wear the Whoop, we talk about the rings, etc. So how we can use that data to understand how much deep sleep is being received, what's the resting heart rate, and what's the strain through heart rate variability, and then titrate interventions from there. And maybe a few other things which are useful are temperature exposures.
Okay.
So I'm a big fan of heat and cold. Heat specifically before going to sleep. So whether it's an infrared access, a red light photomodulation session, a sauna or steam, or even something as simple as having a warm shower, right? That can be as effective for all of us who don't have these devices or access at home. And then in the daytime, exposure to cold. So cold water, swimming pool, hydrotherapy, or cryotherapy, etc. These are all, very effective modalities used to improve recovery.
Amazing. Yeah. I actually recently started using the sauna.
Okay.
The only time in the week I get the time post-workout, because I'm trying to plan it post-workout to also affect blood volume and hypertrophy as well.
Good.
So I'm doing it on a Sunday. So that means Sunday my 2 hours go in the gym, then I'm driving to the clinic, getting into sauna, going back home. Then giving my body 30 minutes for my temperature to come to normal, and then showering and eating. But I can't tell you what a difference it's made. My HRV yesterday on the Whoop went up, and I posted this on my stories actually. It was 60% higher than it's ever been. I literally went from an average of 40 to a 75. So just post the sauna session, and I feel LDL has come down, cholesterol markers are better, sleep is better on the day that I do the sauna. So, I mean, it's a small thing. We have the infrared sauna, but I just feel like the impact on the body is not even understood. If like enough in India at this point. I see a lot of studies and literature coming out from abroad. But, and also now that recovery is sort of coming into the conversation, not yet on the front line, there's a lot of noise that's coming in as well. So there's a lot of people talking about it without fully understanding it. So I love that you're giving us your perspective on it, because I know how much research and backing has gone in beyond that. And so what of these interventions do you feel can be used not just by elite level athletes, but people who go to the gym or work out regularly, even marathoners like yourself?
I think all of them. I think there's a role to play, and it might not be that an individual may be able to spend, say, time in a 3-minute cryotherapy session, but they could still do a cold shower at home. And it might not be that they want to expose the full body to a cold shower. They could still do a face plunge in ice, which gives an equal, not an equal, but a degree of vagal response in terms of sort of parasympathetic effect on heart rate, etc. So there's lots of things that can be done by people. They don't need to be elite athletes, and they don't need to necessarily have to go to have the advanced infrastructure around them. So I think that can have, massive roles to play in people's life.
So I actually also want to dive into some of the tools that we brought up before. Hypoxia training and Hyperbaric. How does that play in when it comes to athletes, and then how can that be used by the layperson as well?
So I think this is actually not fully understood by people. So let's maybe break the science up a little bit, right? So hypoxia is a low oxygen environment. And the machines which are available today are hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So, for example, when I was climbing the mountain 2-3 weeks ago, I am sitting at the summit at roughly 6,300 or 21,000 feet. The oxygen tension in the air, because the pressure is lower, is about 40 to 50% of what we're breathing today, right? Because as you go higher, the oxygen comes down. Now, that exposure to low oxygen is the trigger in our cells, primarily through the mitochondria, which is the energy production part of the cell, to trigger HIF, hypoxic inducible factor, which has this cascade of effects across the body, from enhanced red blood cell production to better management of oxygen in the mitochondria, etc. Right. So there are many different things that can happen. If people are really interested, they can read the book. Right. So an author always plugs his or her.
Absolutely.
So that's one piece. Now the confusion arises in that people ask, okay, doc, but then these machines are hyperbaric oxygen and you are increasing the concentration of oxygen. So that's actually working through two different mechanisms. The first is that a lot of cellular tissue in the body is actually devoid of the appropriate amount of oxygen. For example, an individual with advanced diabetes and peripheral vascular disease, because of the tiny capillaries in the cells in the periphery, like their feet, not getting enough tissue oxygenation, that's local hypoxia. Those cells are hypoxic compared to the rest of the body, and that's leading to an effect. So by increasing the exposure to a person through a machine like the ones you have here, you are dissolving oxygen in the blood, and therefore the amount of oxygen made available to cells is higher. That's one way of working, right? The better modality or programming that can be done is that when a person is sitting in this machine, the individual gets exposed to higher and higher concentrations of oxygen, and then you bring them back down to room air, right? We call this a rebreathe exercise, where they're then exposed to room air for a period of 3 to 5 minutes, and then you take them back up again. So you do this cyclically. This is the way we program it for athletes, for example, because the longer term benefits happen through, I don't want to be too over scientifically here, but the relative hypoxia. So when you're being exposed to too much oxygen, you're then being brought back to room air, your body perceives that as a relative period of hypoxia or low oxygen tension, and it starts to kick in the mechanisms which you would get if you were sitting on the top of a mountain, the HIF. So for athletes who are listening to this, who are looking at this from an adaptation perspective, for those individuals, it's better to do this programmatically in cycles where the machine takes you to a high oxygen state, you then come down, you breathe room air for a few minutes, and then you go up and down again. And actually, I was exposed to a lot of this through your husband's work, Akshay, when he messaged and sent me work being done by Dr. Shai Efrati. In Israel, and he's sort of the leading contender around this. So he's got some incredible protocols, and his team have been kind enough to share a lot of that. And so we now adapt that to the Indian context for the athletes that we work with. So that's sort of how oxygen and the differences between high and low have a role to play in cellular function and performance.
In fact, Dr. Efrati's work on longevity also is brilliant, and his protocol for hyperbaric is something that we follow here because the effect on telomere lengthening, I think he's the only one who has studied it in that level of detail, but that's something that we keep trying to emulate because it's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. So it's very effective. I've seen the research that his team have put out around individuals who have suffered from a cerebrovascular event like a stroke, a hemorrhage, or an infarct in the brain. People who are neurodegenerative decline, cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease, etc. And then increasingly now around metabolic disease as well. So different applications. I'm sure that as the science advances, the protocols, the concentrations, the time, the exposure, all of that will evolve and change.
The work that they're doing actually on autism as well with kids. So that's also fascinating to see how it's benefiting these kids positively to have that exposure and go through those protocols.
Okay, fascinating. Yeah, I mean, it's cool. I mean, this is a tool that we didn't even have a few years ago. So very happy to see this percolate out. Yeah.
So sports recovery is something we touched on briefly.
Yeah.
But that is a field that I believe is up and coming in India, not yet understood. And like I was saying, there's a lot of noise as well, and a lot of people coming in with partial information, but not completely aware of what it's actually doing to the body.
Yeah.
I'd love your thoughts and opinions.
So I've been exposed to this for a long time because my wife, Ranney, she's a sports physiotherapist. So she's been talking about this to me for so long. Because when I first started running, I would make all the mistakes that all runners make, which is, there's not an appropriate warm-up, there's not an appropriate cool-down, there's no attention being spent on strength conditioning and all of that stuff, which eventually leads to an insult and a decline in function. So it's really good to see how the knowledge base is now increasing, right? So I think there's a lot of work that we as weekend warriors can do even before the start of an event, beyond the discipline of running itself in terms of strength training, and then of course all the recovery techniques that you're alluding to, which is around temperature, sleep optimization, supplements. There's so many I mean, you go on Instagram for 2 minutes and you're being exposed to magnesium. Right?
Absolutely.
So everybody these days is on magnesium for something or the other. But there are so many supplements now and knowledge base around that, which foods to eat, which foods to avoid. So it's good to see these conversations happen. I just hope we continue to do it through platforms like this, which are ones which allow the science to be in conversation with, and anyone who's watching should not just listen to this and just say, okay, I'm going to do it. You know, I'm a big fan, like you do, like I do, you know, take a data point, whether it's your HRV, whether it's your resting heart rate, you know, whether it's your muscle mass, take a data point, measure it, try an intervention after a conversation, maybe with an expert, and then see whether that data point is improving or declining. If it's improving, great. If it's not working for you, you know, we are all a universe of n equals 1 anyway. So then try something else. There's enough choice.
What is your favorite sports recovery tool?
Oh, wow. I mean, beyond sleep. I'm a big fan of sleep. So beyond sleep, the one thing that I would do every week, I can't just pick one because honestly, I've just constructed a mini ecosystem. So I've got a red light panel at home.
Okay.
So I use that almost daily or every other day. I ensure I get my sports massage done every Sunday.
Okay.
That's very, very important. I use the chill pool about 4 to 5 times in a week.
Okay.
Not on a day that I'm doing a high intensity workout, because as you rightly alluded to, those are days where heat exposure is more important. So I do a sauna or a steam about 4 or 5 days in a week, and I'll do a chill pool or a chill exposure maybe 3 to 4 times. So that's really important for me. I judiciously take magnesium to ensure that my muscle relaxation happens. Magnesium is, yes, it's important for sleep, but folks listening should also appreciate that calcium allows the contraction of muscle, magnesium allows for the relaxation. So very, very important. I also get my vitamin B and D levels checked every 3 to 6 months, because those are really important micronutrients for muscle performance. And then I check my endocrine health, my testosterone and my DHEA. And for women, of course, we do the others, LSH, FSH, estrogen, progesterone, etc., once every 6 to 12 months, because one has to make sure that the hormonal environment is optimized. And then in terms of eating, I make sure I get my protein priority every day. I try to hit the 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. Very difficult in an Indian environment. Very, very difficult. But that's where some of these newer protein substitutes and powders and shakes are available, which can help, provided that the right composition and calorie free, etc. So that's sort of how I construct my little environment for myself. Yeah,
that's amazing. I'm actually quite proud of myself listening to you, because I feel like at least 5% of that I'm on top of.
Awesome.
But still, the tests and magnesium and the wearables, of course, and then glucose monitoring and with the IV and everything are pretty much... My sauna is once a week. Cryo is impossible for me because But
you have it right here?
No, it's not that. I freeze.
Oh, okay.
I go in and 30 seconds and I'm out. Okay. That's the extent of it. My shower has to be like the burning sun.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to move myself towards colder water and stuff. It hasn't happened yet, but I do the local cryo actually when I feel like I need it, like on joints and specific parts, because I can't take the whole body.
That's very powerful. And I remember after I did the full marathon last year, your team were at the finish line. And first time I tried the local cryo, and I can tell you, I just felt so good after that. How much of it is sort of psychosomatic, dopamine driven versus localized relief? It was incredible, including the Normatec, the compression, which is available now. A little clunky to wear, and especially if you're sweaty post-exercise.
But now I have one of those at home. I have the red light panel at home. I have the Hyper Eyes gun at home. So at least my basic recovery, even the things that to complement what we have here, we anyway have it at the clinic as well. But these are things we've added just so that you can use it more often.
It's amazing. Growing up, we used to compare TV screens and sound systems. Now we're talking about red lights at home and this at home. The world is changing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to actually, from this, divert into more tools and devices, which are all the monitoring devices that are out there.
Yeah.
You have the Whoop, you have Ultrahuman, you have Aura. Everyone has a favorite.
Yeah.
But beyond the brand names and what they actually are, I want to talk about the metrics that we're measuring.
Yeah.
there's so much information. There's HRV, there's VO2 max, REM, sleep. We can talk about this for days.
Yeah.
What are metrics that you find important to measure, and what do they actually mean?
Yeah, so I'm really excited that users and consumers have access to their biological data. I mean, for me, the fact that you can empower an individual and the ability for them then to hopefully make decisions about his or her health is incredible. And I think more of that should happen, because for far too long, we used to just rely on doctors to give us advice and give them the power and onus of control. That's now the pendulum is shifting, which needs to do. I think what this is bringing, however, is a high degree of overwhelm and confusion. Not just in terms of the end user, but even frankly in the medical fraternity. I mean, I give talks to doctors explaining how to interpret these things, and because we just weren't trained or exposed to these things in med school, etc. So clearly, there's a lot to be done. There are many devices. Looking at me now, you'd think he doesn't have any, but that's because I use them in specific contexts. I think we all go through this journey of high adoption, excitability. Then we realize, okay, this is good for this, and then I'll only wear it in that particular domain. So I do wear a sleep ring when I obviously sleep. I wear a common watch when I'm day-to-day activities. I have a Holter device to track my heart and strain when I'm doing my long runs. I do wear a glucose monitor once every 6 to 12 months. Because like every Indian, I'm pre-diabetic and insulin resistant, no matter how hard we try.
Absolutely.
So that's really important. I have a smart scale at home that I can, with some degree of confidence, at least track the trend line, particularly for muscle mass, which is what I care about the most at this age. And there are a bunch of other things which probably will come to mind. The number one digital biomarker, which I consider from a longevity lens, is our VO2 max, which is the aerobic capacity of the individual. It's a highly integrative composite function because it's looking at heart health, it's looking at respiratory function, it's looking at circulatory capability, and ultimately mitochondrial efficiency as well. But a person can measure their VO2 max in a lab, in a hospital, or now a lot of these devices do a calculation for you. So that's very, very important. And it is honestly the number one predictor of longevity. Okay. Very clear global evidence around this. So everyone should really know their VO2 max like they know their body weight. And as I said, it's fairly easy to measure now with the wearables. The second digital biomarker that I care about is muscle mass. So I never look at a person's weight actually. And BMI is an old school epidemiological sort of tool. It does nothing about the individual because her muscle may be high, but therefore the body weight and the BMI is skewing for that perspective. So muscle mass, very important, particularly for those of us who are approaching 40 and on the other side. It is metabolically the most active tissue, very difficult to keep up unless you're working around it. And we spoke about hormones, we spoke about protein, we spoke about stimulus. All those things are really important. So that's my top two. Then I'm really interested in sleep metrics because India is the second most sleep deprived country. The average Indian sleeps somewhere between 5.5 to 6 hours, but we have a high number of people living in this country who get less than 5 hours of sleep. So every time I do a big event in a corporate and I have hundreds of people in the room, I always ask the question, how many hours of sleep? And 8 hours, put your hand up, 7 hours, put your hand up, etc. There will always be about 15% of the room who are 5 hours or less. And for our viewers, so that they appreciate the challenge this gives to us specifically, one night of poor sleep being defined as less or 2 hours of deprivation, so ideal being 7. So if you're getting 5 to 7 hours, will lead to an insulin resistance over the next 48 hours, 4 to 8-fold increase.
Wow.
Now, we are anyway so metabolically disadvantaged. Our foods are anyway carbohydrate rich and highly calorific. You add the insulin resistance because of poor sleep, and it's no wonder that we are the diabetes capital of the world. So whether a person comes to me in clinic asking to lose weight or to become a higher performer physically or longevity, always look at the sleep data first. And there's so many devices for that now, which is great. So sleep is a big thing. And then the heart rate variability that you mentioned, or measuring strain. There are different ways of measuring strain. This is, again, a nice metric to keep track of. So heart rate variability is an inverse function. The lower the number, the more stressed your body is. it's complicated because I can't compare mine to yours. It's genetically intrinsic to you, and you basically need to understand what's your band that you operate in, and then are you at the higher end or the lower end of the band. So these are just some of the day-to-day digital markers that crop up.
What I love, though, particularly with the heart rate variability, maybe because I've been wearing, like you said, the Whoop for so long and put so much emphasis on that. VO2 max is something that I just got off the Ultra Human Ring. I didn't know what mine was until recently, even though I've been trying to calculate and figure out what it wasn't happening. But I've noticed that the impact of little things on my HRV is so dynamic. To the point where I'm someone who would really enjoy I'm not a heavy drinker, but that 1 or 2 glasses of whiskey when I go out for dinner, I would love. And now just the fact that I know my HRV will drop and my recovery score will be lower the next day, and I will feel it. It's not like the numbers are showing me something and I'm feeling something else. When my HRV is at a 19 versus a 40, I do feel it, and that only happens to me with alcohol. So, I literally now I'm happy to pass on that, because I'm like, my workout will be less efficient tomorrow. My strain will be lower. My heart rate will spike more in a more basic workout, and I'm going to feel more tired and not get the output that I want. So I feel like looking at these things, there's so much that I've learned just about myself and my body and how to sort of control. Even a stressful day, if I have a stressful day in the office, even if I've slept well with the magnesium and the melatonin and everything, my HRV will be lower the next day because I was upset, I was stressed, I looked those numbers in terms of cortisol. So it's really fascinating to see that.
No, it is. I'm a big fan of the box breathing technique, especially in a stressed day, where you're encouraging an individual basically to breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale and hold. And it immediately activates the vagus nerve. And
I do, on days when the stress is really high, I do guided meditation as well.
Very good.
I have a couple of the apps, Headspace and tapping. So when it's really bad, the tapping solution one is good because it actually gets you into your body. So those are really helpful. And then this is something, the box breathing is easy to do because it doesn't involve disturbing your partner by playing a meditation in the middle of the night. But that's good to know. So my next question to you actually is about Human Edge. How did that come to be?
The book gave its name. On the back of the book, I reached the stage where people were genuinely interested and excited about this topic, because we'd all come out of the pandemic and the realization of how important health is to our day-to-day lives and organizational success as well, to some degree. So I started to get invited to do a lot more of the talks and workshops and trainings, etc. And when that would happen, people would say, okay, now Doc, what next? How do we actually implement this? So it started to evolve. And about 2 years ago, working with some entrepreneurs who then became investors in the business, they said to me, we have a country where this is such a big problem, but there has been no medic who's brought a solution to market, which has a thorough understanding of the performance world and the longevity world, and can basically stitch a program and a protocol. Everything we are being exposed to is, Western-led, Western-centric, etc. So I thought that's a very interesting problem to solve for self and for others. So the program came to be. So that's sort of what we've been doing over the last few years. So typically a person comes in, we do a thorough battery of diagnostic tests. We then identify the pain challenges and where the areas of focus need to be, including what their biological age is, and then basically build and deliver a lifestyle-based intervention. So for me, it's not about drugs. Actually, we celebrate if we bring people off a statin or a metformin, etc. How do we ensure that lifestyle can be sustainable? That's not to say we don't use a lot of supplements. Of course, that's very, very important for people, and natural remedies, etc. But that's sort of the focus of how we go about doing what we do in the clinic.
Amazing. And this is India's first longevity protocol.
It is. And that's a very important theme because, I get the opportunity to interact with a lot of these global individuals at conferences. And one of the things I noticed very early on was that you cannot, and I don't just mean for India, I think this will apply everywhere. You cannot do a lift and shift approach to a solution like this, because I was having a conversation today with some microbiome experts in the US. our microbiome is fundamentally different to someone sitting
Absolutely.
in North America. Even if it's an Indian sitting in North America, it will be different. So if your microbiome is different, if the exposure of your genes to foods over generations has been different, if your genetic makeup and therefore your epigenome is different, how can you expect an Indian, therefore, to eat the avocado, feta cheese, olive oil, salmon?
Yeah.
I mean, one may enjoy the taste. I love the taste, but that's not the way our biology is evolved. So we need to ensure that we're talking about millets and ragi and bajri and all the things which we are used to, our generations have been used to. So a longevity solution had to be localized for precisely those reasons. And that's actually a big part of how we then deliver. And I think leads to a high level of adoption and engagement and therefore impact and success.
And it's easier, I feel, for people to cook the foods that are more easily available to them, but also more palatable.
Right.
Not, I mean, you and I have traveled and been exposed enough. We are happy to have the salmon. Frankly, I'm sure our kids are as well because they're as exposed. But to the lay person, a ragi or a millet or a jawar is a lot easier to adopt. Even a red rice, for that example, than it is your salmon and feta cheese and avocado.
Yeah. Even protein sources, I mean, there's a big tension which always exists, especially with a vegetarian who then tells me, okay, doc, dal is my primary source. And you then explain to them how poor dal is as a protein source. And then you've got to then talk about, okay, what are the other protein sources, which they might be averse to. My in-laws are Jain. And my mother-in-law sent me this message, which I've saved on my phone, which is that, Marcus, thanks to you, I've given up all the she's Gujarati Jain, so all the kakra and fafra and all the stuff I can't even pronounce. And because of you, I'm now walking after meals. But then 2 weeks later, she says, but now, I'm X kilos down and my need for insulin is not there. My A1C is reduced. So, if we can do it in the right way, and if the mother-in-law gives that blessing, then I know something is working. Yeah, she's going to hate me when she sees this. Yeah.
So when it comes to your longevity protocol, how does this apply to the average human? Who does it benefit? Who is it aimed at?
So whilst it's true that today this is sort of and let's be honest, everything we've spoken about today, a lot of it is a premium experience. My ambition and the reason why I started the company, and it goes back to a TED talk that I gave 7-8 years ago, is that how can we build a digital intelligence that allows a degree of scale where affordability and accessibility no longer become a problem. So the main problem that we're actually solving for at Human Edge, and I've got an incredible tech leader and an engineering and data science team, is now taking all of the learnings that we have from our in-person and virtual protocol to convert into a digital intelligence layer. Nowadays, people understand this as an LLM or artificial intelligence, but it's primarily sort of a rule engine which is evolving into a machine learning layer, so that the end user, without having to see a person like myself, can upload data through a simple mobile interface, have it fully interpreted and analyzed, and then provided with a lifestyle plan the same way that I would be doing in the clinic. So we just ran our first intelligence comparison where the same data set was given to our human doctors as was to the intelligent layer that we've built. And we saw over a 70-degree of overlap. So our ambition over the next 6 to 12 months is that can we achieve a 90% overlap?
Yes.
Right now, we're training the model. So the intelligence layer will make recommendations to our human doctors, and the doctors can then modify. But I'm very optimistic that in the next 12 months, we should reach a state where the degree of lifestyle suggestion is on par with the global best. And then anyone can, through a mobile device, through their blood test, which hopefully they do once a year, or any of these wearable devices, can get those interventions so that more and more people can be helped.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And how important do you think is biomarker monitoring?
Very important, because I can't treat what I can't measure. Right. And it's so that same philosophy. So in the same way that we spoke about N equals 1 is the universe that we each care about, if you don't have a biomarker, which is the one that you can sort of look at the trend line, it's very difficult for you to know whether the intervention you're doing is actually helpful or not. Now, there are some things which are beyond the scope of biomarkers today. Like we talk about mitochondrial efficiencies, and a lot of people will go online and they'll hear influencers talking about, oh, do this for your mitochondria, do this for your mitochondria. It's almost impossible. There are very few tests. We actually partner with the IIT here in Bombay, Indian Institute of Technology, where we developed a very specific array to test for inferences around mitochondrial activity, which we've been running in high performance athletes. But otherwise, it's very, very difficult. So people also should be cognizant of the fact that not everything can be measured as easily as might be suggested in the online world. But there are things that they can measure. And in that instance, please do measure.
Absolutely.
So I'm a very big proponent of ensuring you get your bloods test at least once, hopefully twice a year, and that you're checking for all of the basic parameters. And then there are some important ones to include. So anyone who's listening to this who's a diabetic, please check your fasting insulin. There's no point just doing your A1C without knowing fasting insulin. Anyone approaching the age of 40, if you're a male, check your testosterone and DHEA. If you're a woman, please check your estrogen, your progesterone, and your reproductive hormones. Because once you're armed with that information, you can then ask your doctor the right question. And if your doctor can't answer it, then it's okay, because, medical education takes time. Then you can try and find an alternative expert who can then provide you the input so that you don't have to live a life of languish and disease. You can actually live a life of optimization and health.
So there's an argument that my best friend and I have regularly.
Yeah.
And he's the anti-me.
Okay.
There's no watch, there's no wearable, there's no this thing. I have to request him to do his blood test. It's been a year, can you do it now?
Yeah.
And the argument there, also from someone who's super fit, athletic, works out daily.
Yeah.
Actually a lot more athletic and on his feet than I am. His argument is always that it's too much information.
Right.
So if I'm not feeling a clinical symptom, I'm not feeling something, why should I test?
Right.
So is that a valid argument? Is there such a thing as too much information?
There's a term, the name now forgets as you ask this question. There's a specific term for people who generated anxiety because of data. Okay. And a lot of it is medical data, because I've seen this even in patients who we give them a sleep ring and they end up sleeping worse because they then wake up every morning with the anxiety, what the sleep score is. And then through the night, they have it, tossing and turning, and they don't get the REM that they require. So it's what percentage? I don't know. It might be 10, 12, 15% perhaps, but it's very real. And therefore, in that individual, it's oftentimes the data is not the hero. And we consume the data in terms of the clinic, and we just tell them, okay, you know what, you should be doing A, B, C, D, E, etc. There's another type of person, I think you and I are in that boat, which gets excited by data and probably more inspired and motivated to do something about it, right? So probably the two extremes, and then everyone else is in the middle, like everything else with life. I, however, would challenge your best friend, and maybe one day we'll have a conversation with him because it'll be interesting. I would challenge him that there are certain things which you may not feel until oftentimes, I won't use the phrase it's too late, but it's reached the stage where you would have gotten a benefit had you intervened earlier on. Number one. Number two is the human body is very good at adapting. And use the case in point. A lot of women in India today, and men actually, but women especially so because of monthly flow, women who are suffering from thalassaemic trait and excessive periods, their hemoglobin levels will oftentimes be sub 10, and they've just grown up that way. And therefore, they don't experience the fatigue or the reduction in physical performance because that's always how they've been, right? Now, in that particular instance, you could actually, if you knew that information, you could ensure that they were being supplemented correctly with iron and vitamin C, or at least their nutrition plan had the right components of vitamin B and iron and vitamin C, etc. So that level slowly comes up over a period of time. So I think there are certain cases for sure where the early intervention will play a role. So please challenge this friend of yours.
100%.
Yeah.
My last question to you, Marcus, is what is your favorite of Elixir Wellness's services?
Oh, I will say the most convenient, which is what I do regularly, is the IV infusion, right? I have noticed for someone who likes to push the body to extremes routinely, which is, again, going in converse to longevity, perhaps, I do sense when I'm not quite operating at the level that I like to. And I have found that the cocktail that your medical team and I have put together specifically for my needs and for some of the athletes we work with is very effective in optimizing that. So it's something that I will. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank
This
you.
was amazing and
Thank you.
super enlightening. And I know how hard it is to get a hold of your time. So I appreciate you taking the time
Thank
to
you.
like go through this with us and in such detail. And for everyone else who's listening, do follow along, follow Spilling Facts on YouTube and Spotify. Thank you, Dr. Marcus, for being here. And I'm sure you found this as enlightening as I did.